Welcome, 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 everybody. My name is Caroline Colas. I'm the Senior Director of Health and Wellness at the Marlene Meyerson JCC in Manhattan. And today on the Positive Psychology Hour, a series that we do in partnership with the Whole Being Institute that's curated by Phoebe Atkinson, we're going to be talking about the art of emotional resilience with Molly Dahl. The art of emotional resilience and practical strategies for resisting reaction and cultivating compassion and gracefully managing ourselves. And we're going to explore the realm of intense and complex emotions by learning why we have them, what triggers them, and how we can engage them and help one another and ourselves. Today, we'll be participating in some interactive exercises from positive psychology and emotion science, and we're going to learn how we can change negative feelings before they impact logical thinking and good behavior. My understanding is that sometimes what happens is we actually get hijacked by our emotions, and we want to be able to distinguish between emotion and behavior, thinking versus reacting, and becoming more comfortable with our emotional landscape. A little bit about our presenter today. She has taught principles of spiritual living since 1988. She's a certified yoga and meditation teacher, was a high school teacher for 18 years, and earned a master's degree in educational leadership. She also completed her certificate in positive psychology, the SIP course. I know a lot of you are on the call that have decided to jump in and do that, from the Whole Being Institute. And Molly is the author of 4 books, including Youth Positive, exploring the unique genius of every 21st century adolescent for teens, their parents, and teachers. The Art of Emotional Resilience, an everyday guide to resisting reaction, cultivating compassion, and gracefully managing yourself. Welcome to the call, Molly. We are so delighted that you're here. It's so interesting to me that we're having this discussion now. I think that it is imperative to learn how to navigate our emotional landscape. And it's something that, once the cortisol gets going, once stress happens, it's an undertaking. Wouldn't you say?
An undertaking, indeed. Yeah. And thank you so much. I am really happy to be here. My life since 2014, when I completed my certificate of positive psychology with the Whole Being Institute, I love this word skyrocket. It has skyrocketed to positivity. And I think now, as Caroline was mentioning, there's no time like the present to really look around us and say, oh goodness, there is no normal anymore. There might be a new normal, but I don't know if we'll ever have normal, whatever that even means anyway, right?
Yeah. In fact, it's one of the reasons I love the word skyrocket. It's one of the reasons I think it's even more urgent right now to come together and to keep coming to the Positive Psychology Hour. And also, if you haven't signed up for the JCC Whole Being Weekend, please consider to do so, because when we come together and when we can reinforce these practices and learn, as you are going to teach us today, Molly, about how to be adaptive and really live into our purpose and really have the skill set to manage both what's difficult and accelerate what's great. It's, especially right now, that's imperative to do, I think.
I think so. And I think the world situation right now, we need people who can do that. And we need this resilience to be forefront of our mind. We need it to be that desktop folder that we click on first is our resilience rather than reacting. And so I agree with this idea that we've got to accelerate goodness in the world.
Yeah. So I'm going to let you get started. I'm going to put some information in case you haven't heard about the Whole Being in-person weekend. We still have room, and it's going to be a wonderful group. Maria Serwa, Dan Tomasulo, Mega, Nancy Buttenheim is going to be here. Winnerly Zeeb is coming. I know that there's a bunch on the call. If you're coming, please put that, hey, I'm in, I'm coming. And if you haven't decided yet and you need help deciding, feel free to call me.
Or just go. If I was closer, I would go. I got the email this morning. I thought,
yeah,
so fun.
So I'll put that in the chat and let us know. Yes, Joanne, I'm in for the weekend. Awesome. Wouldn't miss it. That's right. And well, I'm going to go ahead and let you get started, Molly, because I cannot wait to hear about how to be less reactive.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. I am really honored to share with you today. I love the Whole Being Institute and being a part of it and what I learned there and the people who organize it and support it. And so I just feel like this community, I'm speaking to my own people. So yay. It's always a little easier to speak to our own, right? So I'm going to give you briefly an overview, and then we'll dig right in. Before that overview, we'll practice a little bit of mindful intention. Well, we won't spend too much time here, but just in your own felt experience of mindfulness, go there now and what that means to you. And if your mindfulness is connected to your breathing, take some breaths. If your mindfulness is coming fully into current time in your physical body, feeling the chair under your seat and the feet on the floor, be there. And then will each of us set an intention? And I love this question, why am I here? And so for this time together, this next short hour, why am I here? Ask yourself and let that kind of percolate up into your intention for our time together. It's very helpful for me. And so I just assume that it's helpful for you as we transition from one activity to the next, from one set of mental activities and processes to the next, that we really come into full current time of what we're doing now. We have so much going on in life, in every area of life, not just our mental domain, but our physical and our emotional and our spiritual. And so to come here now where we are and focus our awareness, what goes in has a better chance of, in the education world, it's called scaffolding. The information we take in when we are present, when we are aware, has a better chance of scaffolding on stuff that we already know, and following that scaffold, it's easier for us to retrieve at a later time. So we can make deeper meaning of the content by being present, allowing our brain to do its little magic that it does in there, connecting new information to something that I already know and utilize, and then deepening my skills in the world through the application and utilization of new information. So your brains are on and fully ready. And so I will share here with you, again, this PowerPoint. You will end up with this. Oh goodness, it's my desktop is a little messy. Let's do this and make it nice and big. So this is just information on me and how to find me if you ever need anything. I do a lot of work with teenagers and families with positive psychology. And you'll have this later, so don't worry about screenshotting or whatever. The way that we do our current time awareness, just coming into current time and why am I here? You can use this intention for the great big picture of you, your whole purpose. You can use it for every new activity that you go through. Maybe next on the weekend, right? The positive psychology weekend that you're all going to get together. As you enter that weekend, why am I here? It's connection, it's learning. And so this question is, it's just incredibly useful at all times. And then the mindfulness practices to get yourself there, your intentional breathing, and then any any that you have, bringing in your self-awareness, aware of the effort that it takes, aware of the dedication that you demonstrate as you show up. We're going to dive right in. The background that I mentioned is my studies with positive psychology led me to emotional sciences because I was so fascinated by the shift in my own self as I studied more and more the positive aspects of being alive as a human being. And I was in the high school classroom as I was studying positive psychology. So I just started feeding little bits of this to my students, along with I taught Spanish. So along with their Spanish language learning, they were learning positive psychology. And I was so fascinated that as my students, high school kids, 14, 15, 16, were learning this information, they were so much more joyful. They were so much more engaged in what they were doing, not just in my classroom, but as I did these little student teacher conferences, I discovered all of their school life and their activities. And so I thought, wow, this engagement comes from them knowing about their positive emotions and their strengths. And so it connected me back into Dr. Barbara Fredrickson's work, as you all know, of understanding the inner resource building that is the natural outflow of experiencing positive emotions. So for me, in my world with teenagers, oh my gosh, this revolutionizes education. Let's get kids positive. When they're positive, everything changes. And so that was my first set of books, Youth Positive. And then I started wondering, okay, so how do well, obviously we know they affect us and things don't go as smoothly or work as well, so to speak. So let's explore that too, because we know that the positive ones work across the board to change perspective and engagement. And so my work then went in with Dr. Paul Ekman and his daughter, Dr. Eve Ekman, and they worked with the Dalai Lama and the Mind Life Institute, Richie Davidson, who else was in there? Daniel Goleman and the other Daniel. So all of these scientific psychology, positive psychology, mindfulness masterminds. And Dr. Paul Ekman ended up teaching the 5 universal emotions. And his work was in Papua New Guinea with a group of indigenous people that had never been exposed to any outside factors or forces. And so being uncontaminated from TV and influences and cultural programming, he studied this group and discovered that indeed, Charles Darwin said it first, that emotions are innate and they are universal. And so Dr. Ekman's work shows us that we have the big 5, and they're on the screen. And I love to drop this in right here. If anybody has seen Inside Out, the Pixar little cartoon movie of the little girl who moves with her family. And so the movie Inside Out is based on the work of, and Dr. Paul Ekman was one of the scientists behind the scenes. And so if you like that movie, watch it again with this information and you'll oh, that fantastic. And so I will go through now these 5 emotions, and I will go through 2 things on each one that really help us understand why we have these emotions and how they show up. What I would like to do first is to tell you, in Dr. Ekman's words, that an emotion, like a little unit of experience, is an internal, automatic, unmediated assessment, threat or no threat. There is no thought involved in this immediate emotion. It is your biology determining if you are safe or not safe. It lasts from a half a second to 5 seconds. That's the emotional chemistry, the biology, the processing of your innate self saying threat or no threat. Okay. And so it's not this great big huge thing that we feel like it is. And we'll talk about why that happens, that great big huge thing of an emotion. But to understand that biologically, neurochemically, these emotions are really short. Half a second, 5 seconds, bam. Okay. And then it's the after effect. Okay. So just kind of keeping in mind the short time frame, biological assessment, threat or no threat. So we'll go through again survival purpose and how the emotion shows up in your physiology. Anger, we'll start there with the big one. The survival purpose of anger is to remove an obstacle on your path to a goal. So I really love this perspective because anger is the big one that I work with in my life. And so when I learned that this survival purpose is moving something that's in your way, preventing you from getting to where you want to go, that said into me, I created meaning. Obviously we do. I created meaning that says, yes, I am a very goal-oriented person. I like to accomplish. I like to go. I like to do. I get frustrated when things don't work right. So for me, learning, oh, that's what anger is. Okay. And then it lost its big fangs and its ugly, scary eyebrows. And it just became this internal experience of biology saying, I have a goal. Sometimes it's a person and you're in my way. So I'm going to get you out of the way. The physiology of anger, and you can all make your angry face, right? A lot of times our hands will clench into fists. We get the angry eyebrows. Our eyes get beady and narrow. We move in toward the object of our anger, because if it's a person, you become the obstacle and you're in my way, so I'm going to move you. And so we get big and scary. Some people get really flushed and their face gets red. I learned with Dr. Paul Ekman and his daughter Eve, she's Dr. Eve Ekman as well, the only time that the human mouth will have square corners, like our mouth isn't square, is in rage. And I don't have pictures of that, but there were some great ones in the presentation. When a person is in rage and yelling, the corners of the mouth get square. The teeth are very prominent. And that is really, really scary for the other person. The common response, this whole nervous system, the autonomic nervous system coming into play with anger is to fight. So we have fight or flight. In anger, it's to fight because I have to move this obstacle. Anger and fear often go together if we're talking about interpersonal relationships, because the angry posture and face creates fear in the other person, and the response of fear is to flee. So the anger person, rawr, the scared person, yikes, that survivally, that's the best option, because then there doesn't have to actually be the physical fight and somebody could get really, really hurt or die. And so for survival, this anger and fear go hand in hand. The angry person is so scary that it creates fear, that the obstacle flees the scene. Nobody fights, nobody actually dies, and this person can achieve their goal and the other person can just go away and with their tail between their legs. Survivally speaking, okay, and we're far, far away from survival tribal sort of living. But we still have these big emotions come up. So we'll look at what we can do about that. So in fear, then, our survival purpose is fleeing, removing ourselves from something that's dangerous, that could potentially harm or kill us. And I really love the widening of the lens on this perspective, that it is not just physical fear. Psychological fear is also a huge factor. And as we have more and more things that make us physically safe, we have solid houses that we live in, roofs over our head, we have fuel and warmth and food and cars that protect us. And so our physical safety is not such a huge factor in most of our day-to-day living, most, not everybody. And the psychological fears seem to have amped up these last couple of years. And so we really can take that perspective of, oh, this psychological fear is what has kind of gotten under our skin as a world, as cultures around the world. And that fear makes us want to flee. We need to remove ourselves from the potential threat. And so in the bodily response of fear, we move away from the object. Our eyes and our nose get really big. Sometimes the mouth will open because we need as much sensory input as we can get to determine safe or not safe. And those are the two big ones that most struggle with. And then sadness. So we'll skip disgust for now and come to sadness. We all know the body posture of sadness: slumped in, rounded back to protect the heart, downcast face, eyes downcast, mouth downcast, everything is down in sadness. The evolutionary purpose, the survival purpose, is to draw the tribe together. We instantly and immediately, on a very primal level, recognize the posture of sadness, the facial expression of sadness. Innately, this is really fascinating, innately, we come wired to go and hold that person. Either put a hand on their shoulder, around their back and on their shoulder, a hand on their forearm, and we ask them, are you okay? We have been trained away from caring for each other. We have had so much fear around us in school. I have watched the progression in school as a teacher that you cannot touch your students. You can't even put a hand on their shoulder. Teachers can't hug kindergartners. And so we have been culturally trained away from our innate desires to care for others. And sadness is that call. Often when we're sad, we can't look at somebody else in the eyes because it's just too much work. So our posture has to speak very loudly, and it does. What I encourage all of us to do is to go back into the heart space and let our innate desire, it's actually a need, to care for each other, to physically approach each other when we know that something is off. Hey, what's happening? Do you want to go outside and get some fresh air? Something, anything to acknowledge that need to be seen and heard. And that's our sadness. Disgust is removing a potential poison from your physical self. And so in disgust, we get back, we put our hands up, our nose wrinkles up here because our nostrils have to get really wide to smell poison, rotten milk, rotten meat, because, we need to survive. So that's disgust. Another super fascinating thing with disgust is we have physical disgust and social disgust. And our physical disgust is poison, rotten, that kind of stuff. Social disgust is poison or rotten people that harm the tribe. And I'm using the word tribe on purpose because these are survival, ancient, from the very first human being. These emotions are how we survived as a people on this planet. And so if there is a disgust response to a human being as another physical being in our tribe, in our community, is to protect the children, the weak, and the vulnerable. And we all know these words, and I hate saying them out loud, but predator, rape, pedophilia, these create psychological disgust in us because we know innately that these things damage the vulnerable, that they harm the children, and that those children will not grow up to be contributing members of the tribe or the community. And so I think as we begin to really understand the survival purposes of all of these emotions, we're just that much better off as human beings. We have a glimpse into what we come with innately to protect ourselves and our people, to protect our children, to protect our communities. And so I think that as we now let this information roll around in us, because now we have it, that it can strengthen the relationships that we have with others. And we'll talk about using the positive emotions to really do that. And then joy in this work is the great big umbrella of all of the positives. So they're all dumped in there. And again, I love Dr. Barbara Fredrickson's work where she goes through she has a top 10 list and then details all of the inner resources that are developed through the experiences of those top 10 positive emotions. But in this work with Dr. Ekman, it's just joy. And so we all know the posture, we all know the facial expression of joy. Joy is procreation. Okay, so the furtherance of the species, we have more babies, and it's progress. It's uniting with community and innovating and creating and making progress in the world that is often the result of joy working together. So those are the big five. I'm just going to check the chat here. The survival purpose of fear is to remove yourself or someone around you from a threatening experience. It could be threatening physical harm, psychological harm, death. So just removing yourself from that potential. Let's pause for just a moment. That's a great big dump of information. Does anyone have any questions on the big five?
Did you see that Dale wrote, anger often masks and can disguise other internal intense feelings? When we identify those feelings, we can hopefully learn to deal with what is really going on.
Yes, thank you, Dale. And it is not just anger that masks. Each person kind of has a propensity toward where they go when things don't go right, when things don't go according to plan. Yeah. And so we use anger because it's so destructive. It's so prominent. It's just really kind of in our face when it's there. Fear can be easily not disguised, but it's not as prominent in the response. But yes, I appreciate that perspective. And each of these can mask others. And we can also feel them at the same time. So it's not just necessarily that I'm going to feel angry, because sometimes I feel angry and I'm afraid at the very same time. So they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. And it's a big basket of stuff that goes on. Yeah. Just some of the questions. People who seem perpetually angry. Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get to the emotional episode timeline. That's a great question, Susan. The name of the author. Oh, Dr. Barbara Fredrickson. Her work in positive psychology. She's just off the charts.
I'll put something in the chat about her. She's written several books. One, Love 2.0.
Yeah, she's fantastic. And then Barbara has a question. Do hatred or jealousy fall under the big five? They don't. The hatred and jealousy are cultural. it's fascinating. If you dive into I'll put Dr. Paul Ekman here. Dr. Paul Ekman, and his book is Emotions Revealed. And his work, again, it was with the indigenous tribe. So, and you'll read his studies and it's really fantastic. There are two others that kind of the jury is out on whether they're universal or not. Surprise would be the other, and can't remember the other one right now. Guilt, shame, hatred, jealousy. No, these are cultural. There are cultures in the world that do not have jealousy. The Tibetan culture, which has now mostly disappeared after the Cultural Revolution with China wiping them out, there's no shame and there's no jealousy in the Tibetan culture, as far as my understanding from studying Tibetan Buddhism for about 12 years. These don't exist. In Japan, there are emotions that don't exist, and I don't remember, but in Dr. Ekman's work, you could read through there. So it's fascinating stuff. And then Robin, the physical expression of disgust. Oh, we move back from whatever it is that's disgusting. Sometimes we'll turn our head away. The nose will wrinkle up, so our nostrils get really big, so we can get, as much olfactory sensation as we possibly can. If it's really, really disgusting, and this can be psychological disgust as well, from another person, vomiting is often a physical response to disgust. And then disdain and contempt. Contempt is the other that could possibly be universal. So contempt and surprise. Yes, and it's different. Contempt is a little bit of disgust mixed with hatred and arrogance. So they're different. And it's just so fascinating because we can start to really dig in and talk about these little mixes of emotions that come out and end up as their own emotion. But I will share here that these big five are families. And so they have a variation from a minimal, like with anger, it could be frustration is minimal, and then it builds, and then rage would be the high end of the spectrum. I'm also going to drop into the chat the Atlas of Emotions. I think it's .com, but it's the website that Dr. Eve Ekman put together, and it is fantastic. It is an amazing resource, especially if you have or work with kids. So that one's there. Okay, great questions. I would love to now move us along into the emotional episode timeline. I think that this will help with the question on, length of the actual emotion. Okay, so this is the timeline that Dr. Ekman explained. There is a second timeline that comes, it kind of follows this one, and it's just got more information, but for our purposes, this basis is fantastic. And so we have these 3 steps that actually comprise the emotional episode. Okay, so sometimes we feel like the emotion is like, I'm always angry, or someone else is always angry, or someone else is always depressed, part of the family of sadness. It can definitely seem like that. Here is what can happen in those instances. The step 1 is pre-emotion. It's called the trigger, and maybe we know this. There is an event. We're going to use anger as the example again, just because it's easy. Okay, so this trigger, and then the emotion or the state, the psychological, physiological state is anger, and then there's resultant behavior. So the trigger, there's always an event, and it could be a raised eyebrow. Maybe your mother or your father used to raise their eyebrow when you were a child, and you immediately knew that that raised eyebrow meant you're in big, big trouble. Okay, so somebody raises their eyebrow at you. Your emotional alert database is the whole memory of your mother raising her eyebrow, resulting in angry episode. Not everybody's mom raised an eyebrow and then yelled at the child. So not everybody has a raised eyebrow as a trigger. Your emotional alert database, and this is neat. This is where it ties into Inside Out, the movie. So go back and watch that movie. Your emotional alert database is all of your previous history, your emotional history, the events, the experiences, the episodes. The first 7 years of life are those years are the foundation. Whatever happens in those first 7 years of life is the bedrock of your emotional alert database. And then you have other experiences that get piled on top. And then there's two big stages of pruning in the brain that will move some of that stuff out of you and away. But again, it's that first 7 years of life. So if your mother raised the eyebrow and you're at work and your boss raises the eyebrow, that's a trigger and you get angry. There might be some words from your boss also, hey, whatever. So the emotional state, again, that's that 0.5 second to 5 second assessment. Is this a threat? Is this not a threat? Your physical changes are your facial mask of anger, moving in toward clenching fists. A lot of times we bite down, our jaw, we clench, because most of us have been trained that we don't yell, we don't shout, we don't curse, right? And so in a way to stop ourselves from yelling or shouting, we bite down because we've been trained that that's not proper. And then our psychological changes, the psychological change would be that mental processing that I can't actually yell at my boss, so that makes me clench my teeth. Okay. And then there's other psychological things that happen, quick memories. And here's the fascinating thing about this. A lot of the stuff, the underneath of the trigger and the emotion state, your emotional alert database, your psychological changes, these happen in pre-conscious awareness. So you're not even aware that this is going on in you. You're aware of the event, your boss, and your physical changes. Hands into fists, my jaw feels tight. So that's, you got this place that's happening behind the scenes of you and the place that you're aware of. And so our goal is to bring awareness to all of this. And it is possible. Okay, right now it might seem like, oh my gosh. And so then from the emotional state, then comes the behavior. The destructive reaction is a pattern. It's a reaction because it just flies out of you. Most of the time in that primary reaction, you're not thinking, oh, I'm going to yell at my boss and tell him he's a jerk. It just happens. It's an automatic patterned response that was learned somewhere along the way, and it became a pattern, a habit, because it worked. It worked to keep you alive and functioning. That does not mean that it works now. And so that's what our resilience is. That is the art of emotional resilience, understanding that I have that behavior pattern of demonstrated anger, yelling, getting really big, threatening, because that's my pattern and it has worked in the past to get me what I want, because I have a goal, and a goal is what I want. And bringing your awareness to this, understanding, oh, I don't have to do that anymore. I can be constructive. I can respond. I can unwind that pattern. So that's our work right there. That's the resilience. And I love this definition of resilience, being nimble in the ever-changing events that happen in the eternal present tense. Being nimble in the ever-changing events that happen in the eternal present tense. Because your emotions always happen now. Your memories of being angry can recreate the neurochemistry of anger, but that's happening now. Doesn't happen in the future. Okay. And so understanding that this emotional state is 5 seconds max. There are these little gaps intentionally in our diagram. There's a gap between the trigger, there's a gap between the emotion and the behavior. That's where we do the work. It does not seem like there is a gap at all. Our awareness, our processing will help us widen this perspective like a microscope going in, and what we think of as one clump of cells, we go in, we microscope that, and oh my gosh, there's so much room between each of those little cells. That's what we're doing here. We're microscoping in on ourselves, and it has to happen in retrospect. As we start this whole resilience process, you're going to have an episode, and maybe yours isn't anger, maybe it's sadness, whatever is for you. You're going to look at that after the episode has passed, and you're going to start processing. Here was my behavior, and you work backwards. Here was my behavior. Oh yeah, that was my patterned response. Of course, that's what happens all the time. That was just, my patterned reaction. What was the actual emotion? Did I feel it in my body? Where did I feel it? Did I notice anything in my psyche? What was the trigger? Do I have anything in there in the emotional alert database? Well, I must, because right? And so you just kind of start working this back for yourself to learn your pattern. See, this is the work. Every single person's pattern is unique. It's like your thumbprint. And so as you go back through, you do not have to dissect every single negative emotional event in your whole life. Good grief, right? You're just getting an overview so you can recognize your pattern. Once you know the pattern, you can break it. Okay. And it just comes from looking little bits at a time. There's some place in here in all of this work that reminds us, let me see. Oh, it's right here. Resisting reaction. This is how we do that. We take perspective. Yeah, I was angry. Oh, there were some other factors involved. Okay, so you widen your perspective. You make those gaps get bigger and bigger between the trigger and the emotion, and between the emotion and the behavior. Set your intention. As you start this whole emotional resilience journey, what is your intention? And for me, it was, well, I've had like 3 years worth of work with these positive emotions through positive psychology. I want that. And so that was my intention. I want more and more of the positive. The whole everything that happens with positive emotions. And then we have to love ourselves, because these emotions are necessary. You have to have them. I think it was in our positive psychology that we learned that all of our emotions travel through the same channels, right? All the positive, all the negative. And if we choke off the negative, then we also choke off the positive. So we have to be able to have a perspective. You know what? I appreciate myself as fully human, and I give myself permission to be fully human. My emotions are necessary. They have a survival purpose. They have messages for me. I need them. And not all behavior is okay. Not all behavior is acceptable. And that's where I draw the line. So our emotions are not our behaviors. They are not the same thing at all. Emotion, a 5-second biological assessment. Our behaviors, potentially the result of that emotion. Okay. And so being able to really love yourself and know that, wow, I've got this process. I've got this history. This is fascinating. Okay. And then being self-responsible. Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar told the story, no one is coming. There's nobody out there that's coming to save you from your emotions. This is all this inner work. And this is why the positive emotions matter so darn much. They are what build your inner resources to overcome your negative patterns. Your positive emotions cause you to engage in life, to engage with community, to engage with family. And no one likes a cranky pants. Have you noticed? If you're cranky, no one wants to play with you, right? And so being self-responsible, taking the time to self-assess, to make the changes, have as many positive experiences as you can. This positivity ratio is real, right? The more positive emotions that you have, the better off you are in life, and use those to help you overcome the negative emotional patterns, right? And then be patient, because this is not an overnight game, right? It takes the time it takes. And patience is not something that I came with as a child. I think impatience is my number one my struggle to overcome. And learning all of this, studying it for so many years, teaching it, it really does take the time that it takes. And if we forget that, then we go outside and we watch the sun, and we watch the colors of the leaves. We watch flowers that bloom and then die. We watch the process of nature. And that teaches us patience, because we are nature. We are not separate and unique from this planet. We are a living organism. We are part of the planet. And just like every other, I'm looking out my beautiful window at these pine trees and the leaves on the other trees turning colors. Just like all of nature, we too require time to go through our cycles. And if our cycle right now is stuck in anger, and I'm learning something about it, I'm going to start doing something about it. And then I'm going to give myself the time that it takes to break that pattern and to create a new ability to gracefully manage myself, which is fun when you get there. And you'll have little moments along the way, and then you'll have some other moments along the way too. And so this came to me in a big brainstorm when I was teaching school teachers about how to help their students manage strong emotions in the classroom. Make it a rare moment. You're going to recognize, oh yeah, I'm having some difficulty, or whatever word, at this point, teenagers would use. This fucking sucks. Teenage language. Okay. Right? Recognize that that's the reality, and then appreciate it. Oh, I can feel really strong emotions, which tells me that I'm alive and involved in this thing called life. If I'm angry, I have a goal and I want to get there. If I'm afraid, I want to remove myself. Okay. So appreciate that you can feel this. You want solutions, you want understanding, and then reframe it. Instead of feeling totally overwhelmed by this neurochemistry, this emotion, this behavior that keeps happening, can I learn something from this? What is the kernel of my learning opportunity? And can I take advantage of that? And then express gratitude. Express gratitude for yourself, because you're working the process. You're realizing your experience isn't just living down underneath in your pre-conscious awareness any longer. It's there. It's coming into the forefront of your mind. Oh my gosh, good job, Molly. I'm starting to recognize this is amazing. And I have some work to do. Okay, handling sadness. In what sense? I mean, just being able to say, I'm sad, what do I do? Or with others. And again, there's no one right answer for each emotion, because every single person has their emotional alert database.
About
And
sadness
so,
from loss? If is that
yeah,
different in any way from?
well, there's one thing that does come to my mind, and our time is a little bit short, but I'll just give you a little nugget quickly. Sadness from loss versus sadness from betrayal. We come innately equipped to deal with loss because of this whole thing of what sadness is, this evolutionary purpose of sadness, to draw support to us. And so we come knowing that loss is part of life. It's never easy. That's not what I'm saying. We simply know that that's part of life. Innately, we have a lot of cultural conditioning that changes perspective of loss and that kind of stuff. Not good, not bad, just the way it is. But we come equipped to handle it with the support of others. We don't come equipped to handle betrayal, because as human beings that need each other to survive, we have a certain sense of trust that comes with us, that we have to trust each other to make it through this. And when we are betrayed, we flounder, because we've all probably experienced betrayal at some degree or another during life. And we just are we have no idea how to manage it, how to process it, because it's not innately in us. Because our innate characteristic of being in community is trust. That's how we survive, is by trusting our community. And when that's broken, we don't know. So the sadness it's such a different flavor. And so processing through it is, again, the self-awareness, really being able to allow yourself to be fully human, to fully experience it. Remember, you are not your emotion. Your emotion is a process that happens. It's physical and it's psychological, but it is not your identity. It is something that happens to you. And so if that perspective can, kind of filter through awareness and into experience, it can really be supportive. Yeah, Rashmi, the process of sadness of loss, similar to being born, leaving the mother's womb and being separated physically from her. Could be. Yeah, I haven't explored that, but it could be. Yeah. Thank you for those questions. And then I'm just looking at the time. And so the other components of this dialogue with a strong emotion, again, you'll have this little note taker. There's no right answer to this. There's no way that you can do it wrong. It is simply getting in touch with this strong emotion that you're experiencing, that you can't seem to move past or get through. And just listen. Every emotion, especially the ones that keep happening, that are our pattern, they have big messages for us. And oftentimes, we've never considered that my emotion has a message for me. We've been so trained away from feeling negative emotions, right? Open yourself up to it. It's there already anyway, right? And just because you look at it and say, oh yeah, I'm sad, that does not make you a bad person. Oh, I'm angry. No, there's nothing wrong with you. When you open yourself up to the reality that that is, and then you explore that, that's your strength. That's your strength to understand it, to move through it, to move past it, to be able to use it to share and support others. Okay. Oh, so that's that's having a dialogue with your strong emotion. Again, if wherever you are on your path with this, let it just sit in the background for a while. And then the power,
There we go.
And I was just going to say the power of positive emotions. We've talked about that. Again, just explore Dr. Barbara Fredrickson's work and allow yourself as much joy as you can. Joy is a choice. And I'll leave you with this quote. We can either choose to grow through suffering and pain, or we can choose to grow through joy. when I heard that quote, that's a life changer for me. We have a choice of whether we choose to grow through suffering or choose to grow through joy. And we can have tremendous growth through joy. And so I encourage you, be joyful, find the good, look for it. We get what we look for. And find joy in your community, find joy in your people, in your family, and your friends. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to remind everybody there's no greater time than now. It really is urgent to create meaning and connection and take care of ourselves and source ourselves. So please consider joining us for the Whole Being Weekend. And I'm going to just stop sharing your screen, Molly, so we can see you. I just find it fascinating, your work with teenagers, because what in essence is, I hear from parents a lot, is that I'm living with this kind of angry, emotional person. And even sometimes when we're living with a roommate or a partner or a friend that's going through something where their emotional environment is very, I'm going to say, fluid.
Yeah.
In a positive way. How do we manage that?
Oh gosh, that support, love them through it. I just started a blog post with my teenage work. And so I'll just pull from what just came up, is that it's unconditional love. It's kind of sounds trite nowadays, but unconditional love, I believe it's the answer to everything. And it doesn't mean that we condone inappropriate behaviors. It doesn't mean that we don't hold others accountable. Because we love them and because we know that their potential is so much more, then we have really authentic, compassionate conversations. We hold each other accountable. So it sets a model of how each person can hold their self accountable. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to, is being self-responsible, and it can be really hard depending on what we grew up with to feel comfortable being self-responsible. It's scary. I mean, you got to be like pretty vulnerable to say, yeah, I did that. It was totally my fault. And I'm working on it. And so we just support others through it with as much positivity and love as we can.
It's just so amazing to have you on the show. And the presentation today reminds me of a quote, which is, energy is everything and everything is energy. And our personal field and maintaining that is so important and so vital. It's one of the reasons why I turn to positive psychology, all these micro practices, whether it's meditation or gratitude or, finding one thing that worked today, really help me maintain my energy. And when my energy is in a different place or in a whole place, then where I come from and even what I say, it reflects that. And I heard you say that today, that, this is how you can understand these emotions so that you can actually have a locus of control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautifully said.
And then you can be in your center of what I call your center of genius, right?
Yeah. I call it your unique genius. Yeah. Living your unique genius. That's right.
So you guys, that's why we have the Positive Psychology Hour, is to help you find that, whatever that is. And also that's why we're coming together again on October 22nd. So we'll have an extra Positive Psychology Hour with Jody Wellman, who did the work on Mondays. How many Mondays do you have left? And she's using, of course, death as a wake-up call, right? And that's, her work is very fascinating. So look for that. Easy fast to those of you that are celebrating Yom Kippur. And we will see you hopefully at the Positive Psychology Weekend, if not before. Take care, everybody. Thank you, Molly. Feel free to unmute and thank our presenter today for an amazing presentation. I don't know if you're reading the chat, Molly. There's lots of support for you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you.